Good evening, everyone. Veronica, I want to make time to allow you for any folks that need interpretation support that are joining us on Zoom. Please select the look for the globe and select Spanish for interpretation. Good evening, everyone. Please take a moment to update your name in Zoom and enroll in the community. Welcome to the Peirce LSC meeting. The members of the LSC are elected representatives of our school. The LSC is responsible for setting the school's direction and policies and for monitoring its financial and educational programs. All participants are muted, and we will invite you to unmute during public participation as indicated on the agenda if you wish to share an update or ask a question. If there are private chat conversations you'd prefer not to share with the LSC, I would advise that you use personal devices for those conversations, as the host receives a full chat log of all Zoom participant chat conversations at the conclusion of this meeting. This meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. For those watching via YouTube, you may email your questions to peircelsc@gmail.com. Should there be any disruptions during the course of the meeting, Ms. Munoz is playing the role of Mr. Lee this evening, I think. We'll use Zoom to mute and turn off the cameras of all participants while the disruptive attendee is removed. If we are unable to remove a disruptive participant, we will close the meeting and a new meeting link will be emailed out to attendees. If you do not receive a new link within 5 minutes, please email peircelsc@gmail.com, where a new link will be shared with you. During the meeting, LSC members will be unable to monitor comments in the chat while discussing school business. Usually April Browning's our chat manager, but she'll be joining us a little bit later this evening. So I'm gonna ask for folks to hold off on typing stack in the chat to indicate your desire or your wish to participate in public participation, so that we can take a moment as an LSC to see who the folks are that are stacking up, since during the course of the meeting, we're not going to be watching chat actively. At the conclusion of the meeting, Ms. Zamy will receive a video recording of the meeting, which will be posted to the LSC Google Drive on the Peirce website. If you have a concern, we urge you to bring it to the teacher or Ms. Zamy prior to raising it at an LSC meeting, unless you feel that it is an emergency. When sharing personal stories, please do not refer to individuals by name. If the LSC decides it's appropriate to hear concerns about individuals, we may go into closed session and invite you to share the details with us there. We'd like to encourage constructive dialogue during our meeting. However, if comments become repetitive or disruptive, I will give a warning to the participant to discontinue the disruptive behavior. If after 3 warnings the behavior continues, the participants will be removed from the meeting. Please remember to pass the mic. Allow 3 other people to speak before asking another question. We don't have all the answers, so we encourage constructive feedback and solutions to address any concerns. I am now calling the meeting to order. LSC members, please announce your name for roll call purposes. Aisha Noble.
Lori Zamy.
Oh, sorry. I'm Miss Zany.
Go ahead.
Jermaine Mabry, Parent Rep.
Lori Zamy, Principal.
Evan
Peirce
Trad,
Wright, Parent Rep.
Evan Trad, Teacher Rep.
Jerry Baumgarten, Teacher Rep.
Elisa Wartic, Community Rep.
Bill Kennedy, Parent Rep.
Matthew Kwame, Parent Rep.
Nicole Granicki, Community Rep.
Thanks all. Okay, let me get my agenda. So items need, well, actually we need to approve the order of the agenda. So is there a motion to approve the order of agenda?
I move.
Is there, that was Trey. Is there a second?
Second.
Evan, and any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Okay, let's move on to items needing approval. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting from April 12th, the closed and open session notes?
I'll motion to approve the minutes from April 12th, closed and open session votes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Minutes, is there a motion for the minutes of the special meeting, April 22nd, closed and open session notes?
I'll motion to approve the minutes of the April 22nd special meeting, closed and open session notes.
Second.
That was Elisa. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. Okay, is there a motion for minutes of the regular meeting, from April 29th?
I'll motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting on April 29th.
Well, second.
That was Elisa. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I abstain. I wasn't present and I didn't get a chance to read the notes, so.
Okay, that was Trey. Motion passes. Okay, next on the agenda is the Zoom chat discussion. And I just want to start that conversation with the LSC by framing the kind of the decision why the LSC moved in this direction when we voted back in January. So the chat in online meetings serves several vital functions. First, it's a useful way to take stack for folks to sign up for public participation. And second, it's a great place for simple directional questions or logistics, such as a place to access the agenda link or to ask for clarification about a date or a tech feature of the meeting. And third, the chat encourages engagement in the meeting and acts as a community building tool in the absence of being in physical space together. So all of these functions serve the broad goal of increasing access and democratic expression. At the last LSC meeting, during the discussion about ACE, some participants in the Peirce community made comments in Zoom chat about white supremacist culture, after which a participant interpreted this to mean that participants were calling teachers white supremacists. So I want to be clear that at no point in the chat did anyone call anyone else a white supremacist, nor was there any name calling. I asked that those spreading this rumor stop spreading misinformation. Continuing to do so undermines the very real work that our community is doing to engage in respectful and intimate dialogue about these difficult topics. Tema Okun, who is the author of The Emperor Has No Clothes, Teaching People About Race and Racism That Don't Want to Know, wrote a paper on the characteristics of white supremacy, white supremacy culture. And she provides a list of these characteristics that appear in every organization because, and I quote, "We all live in a white supremacy culture. These characters show up in all of us, people of color and white people. Therefore, these attitudes and behaviors can show up in any group or organization, whether it is white-led or predominantly white-led, or people of color-led, or predominantly people of color." So for those that are interested in learning more, I highly recommend reading this paper as it includes the definitions and antidotes for the damaging characteristics of white supremacy culture. Once I stop and take a moment, I will drop a link in the chat. But I just wanted to wrap up by saying I am grateful that as an LSC, we have approved hiring an anti-racist consultant to work with the LSC on defining terms around diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work so that we can move forward as a cohesive unit with a mutual understanding of anti-racist terminology and frameworks in order to address the needs of the Peirce community. So with that, I will turn it over to the LSC. Jerry?
Yes, Aisha, thank you for that introduction. Evan and I have prepared a letter after speaking with some teachers. Everyone has their own interpretation. Good evening. We are aware that this meeting focuses primarily on budget. However, due to the fact that we represent the voice of the teachers at our school, we feel it is important to address some concerns that teachers had in a timely manner. After the last LSC meeting, which was heavily attended by teachers, we received many comments, concerns, and questions about the chat log. After teachers were given the opportunity to view the chat log document, some were quite upset and concerned. It appears that comments made in the log were considered harmful to some individuals. The question also was raised as to whether or not this is an appropriate function for us to have open during the meetings. The reason is because due to OMA, chat is not accessible to everyone. If you are viewing on YouTube, you cannot use or view that chat function. And if you are listening via phone, you cannot use or view the chat function. Lastly, the chat is not translated, therefore excluding non-English speakers. We have talked about accessibility of all at length, and this is an example of something not being accessible to all. We would also like to consider the fact that if these meetings were in person, would we allow someone to stand up while others were speaking and interrupt them with verbal comments? Therefore, we are proposing a vote on whether or not to keep the chat open during meetings, and if we agree to keep the chat function open, that we develop some guidelines to ensure that it's respectful and comments are closely monitored. We urge you to think about some of the teachers' perspectives, again, some, not all, and how the use of the chat at the last meeting caused harm, hostility, and division amongst the entire community. We also would like you to consider this excerpt from the LSC guide. This is from the LSC guide, public participation. Public participation is required at all open LSC meetings, regular, special, and committee meetings, and at the 2 annual progress report meetings. The LSCs may establish rules governing public participation. Such rules may include that speakers sign up to speak prior to the beginning of the meeting, will be permitted to speak in order in which they signed up, may speak for a limited amount of time, for example, 2 or 3 minutes, conduct themselves in a civil manner, or lose their right to address the council and may be asked to leave the meeting if they are disrespectful or disruptive. LSCs are encouraged to provide interpreters, including sign language at meetings, as needed in order to maximize the participation of parents and the community. Members of the public may videotape and/or audiotape LSC regular and special meetings. Such recording, however, may not interfere or disrupt the meeting. The LSC may require that the recording cease if it disrupts the meeting. I will submit this to Ms. Granicki for notes, but Evan and I would like to thank you for your time, and we urge you to consider the feelings of some of our colleagues and vote further on this.
Thanks, Jerry. Any questions or comments from the council?
Thanks for sending that, Jerry. I'll put that in the notes. I just want to bring up kind of what I've noticed as a trend since I've been involved with the LSC, is that anytime somebody calls out racism that they see or calls out white supremacist culture that they see, there are some who claim that that's like harm being caused to them, who felt like it was a personal attack on them. And I guess I would just encourage those who are feeling personally attacked by racism being called out and by white supremacist culture being called out to reconsider that and try and reframe it. And I've always been, or I was told once that when somebody calls you out for doing something racist, it's really a gift, you know? They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to take that time to call that out. They could just write you off, you know, as a racist. But somebody who's taking the time to call out racism and calling out white supremacist culture should really be listened to. And those of us who can learn from that should really accept that as a gift so that we can learn and grow from that.
I really appreciate your response to that. I appreciate your point of view. I also want to add while you were speaking, I think that also it needs to be noted that we're not saying that people can't have these conversations and these conversations can't benefit us as a community. Sometimes it's not what you say all the time, it's how you say it. And I don't think this is isolated to just the white supremacy comment. It's distracting. For example, I was reading something and someone typed in while I was reading a letter from a colleague, someone typed in a comment as I was reading. And I just think that if we were in person, if someone stood up and interrupted us while we were talking, we would find that disrespectful and we'd find that a little bit confrontational. So we're not saying that people shouldn't be able to talk, but I think that the chat could be closed off until public participation. And I also think that it's important to take into consideration of all the educators in our building and all of their points of view. Some felt this way and some didn't. So I just would like to add that. And, like I said, I'm going to submit this for the notes. Evan and I will submit it for the notes so it can be read further. But I think that this is something as an LSC, we need to come together and talk about and come to an agreement where everyone feels comfortable and welcomed. And also the accessibility issue is an issue. I mean, it's not translated. We're excluding our Spanish speakers. We're also not, if you're on YouTube or you're on your phone, you don't have the luxury of sitting on a Zoom call. You can't see the chat, you're excluded. We've talked a lot about inclusion. We have an inclusion model at Peirce. And as the LSC, we should really be modeling that as well. Mr. Trad, I'm not putting you on the spot, but if I've left anything out, my co-pilot, would you like to add something? I just want to make sure that we get all our points across.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear, Jerry, and I'd love to have a conversation about how to make the chat more inclusive. In terms of distracting, like what I find distracting is when we're trying to have these difficult conversations, the focus being shifted to tone and what's how to say something in a respectful way and how not to say something. And I'm grateful for people who speak up and who call out, racism and white supremacy when they see it. And I want them to be heard and to be able to say that and not be worried about, the tone or how it's being said. But I hear you with the accessibility issue for chat.
Maybe this is something that we should talk about in closed session and as a council and vote and, so that we can hear everyone's perspective on it. Evan and I really just wanted to bring light as the educator's voice. We take it very seriously. And when we have a majority of teachers coming to us, then it is our duty to say something.
So Jerry, this is based on comments that you received from, you said, a majority of the teachers? And you guys kind of collaborated on putting together that letter out to everyone?
Evan and I collaborated on the letter, and like we stated in the letter, this is not all teachers, because I respect that some teachers did not feel that way, but we had a majority, we had a good enough amount of teachers coming to us. And just like we represent all teachers, I respect that not all teachers felt that way, and we represent them too. But there
were enough, sorry, Ms. Baumgarten,
Go ahead,
there were
go
enough
ahead.
teachers who made statements or came to us that we felt that it needed to be addressed by the council.
Absolutely.
I think, I think we have been working really hard on equity and allowing the voice for all, right? And being an inclusive council. I don't think that the chat function is inclusive. I also think that we give plenty of opportunities for people to speak. And I do agree with you, Nicole, that it is important that, things that are deemed as racism or promoting white supremacy culture be called out. but I don't know if the chat function is the best way to do that, because like you said, tone can be misinterpreted in a chat function versus saying it directly in a public forum. We give plenty of opportunity for people to speak. Oftentimes there are very few people who speak. Sometimes there are a lot. So I think, we should be mindful, LSCs don't have to have the chat function on. That's not a norm. That's something that we decided as an LSC, but I know there are many, including the City Council and the Board of Ed, that don't always have a chat function available during their meetings. So I think we should be considerate of that as well.
Thank you, Evan. And before I make my last comment, I just want to be on record saying that Mr. Tradd and I represent all the teachers, whether we agree or disagree with them. Anything that is brought to us, we bring to the LSC or admin, whether we agree or disagree. So I just want to be on record saying that we try to represent all voices of our colleagues.
I think that's very important. I think that's why we do also, when I try to talk to the parents, the teachers, the community, trying to hear different perspectives. I think that's very, very important. So I'm glad that you're bringing that up. I mean, I always say, I always try to understand. I don't necessarily need to agree, but I think it's important that you guys are bringing the clarification here.
Miss Amy, can I ask, as far as, Jerry, thanks for bringing up the issue about accessibility. For sign language needs, is there, do we have room in the budget to have sign language at LSC meetings?
I mean, before we go into the budget, what is the CPS guidance? What has been done historically? This chat function, some of the chat, the sign language, I feel like this has been going on for a while. Like, is there any guidance from CPS, I don't know if Justin is here, from the local school council relations office? Has anything been done historically?
We have never had sign language provided at our meetings. I think this is an example of a policy that doesn't come with dollars to support it. And so then it's up to the local school to allocate those funds. So I think this is a question that needs to be had with Office of Local School Council Relations. Because I think if this is a means to allow for inclusion for those who require it, we should provide it. And then if it's provided, where does the funding come for it? So I can follow up with Office of Local School Council Relations. I also wanted to just make sure that I asked for a point of clarification with Jerry and Evan. I want to make sure that I'm clear that the concern is not about white supremacy culture. The concern was about language or just interruptions in the chat and accessibility of the chat. Am I correct in saying that? Because I think what Nicole raised is an important point, right? Are we saying that we are not able to engage in conversations where we see white supremacy culture in action and addressing it? That's to me something that we should be able to address and talk through. But I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying on behalf of the teachers.
Yes, it's last meetings was just one example of that. And I agree with what you're saying. It's the concern of the interruption It's the concern of the comments being made could be construed as disrespectful or stifling of people's voices. That is evident. Am I leaving anything out? No, that seemed to be the primary concern. And also, we haven't had this problem in a while, but in the past, there has been some sidebar conversation and names were used. So all in all, it's more of a respectful, honoring other people's opinions and what they're saying, and it not being disruptive in sidebar conversations about the present comments.
This is Trey, I want to just address the inclusion issue, and then, I don't know how inclusive it is if we're only relegating one mode of communication for people. So the chat is what I thought was used for people to express themselves, respectfully. That's why we have these, Aisha reads out the code of conduct so people are aware. I think even you just said, Ms. Baumgarten, that we haven't had that situation occur in a while where, so that's not an issue. And if it does happen or occur, the code of conduct, Aisha and the council will take appropriate action. I do think this is something that demands further discussion. So I'm wondering if we're going to have a closed session on this, can we table this discussion to have a closed session so that we'll have the correct people in the room, the people from, I forgot his name.
Justin
policy.
Heath?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Right, in order to,
LLC relations.
thank you, yes, I couldn't remember.
I agree, Trey. Thank you. And yes, I would be, I'd be open to that, because I think it is important that this be given the time that it's that it needs. I also would encourage you, if you go back and watch the YouTube video and watch the video and the chat at the same time, it's very enlightening to see. It can be insinuated that teachers were promoting white supremacy in the chat. It also can be insinuated. If you look at the video and look at the chat simultaneously and see that together, it's kind of like closed captioning, where if you read it isolated, you might not understand that. You can see that some of the comments being posted along with some of letters being read and stuff were probably not very kind. So I agree, Trey. I don't think Mr. Trout and I are comfortable with just writing this letter and being done with it. I would like us to discuss this in closed session and come up with the LSC, come up with a solution that fits everyone.
Okay. And just,
Can I move that? Oh, thanks.
sorry. Well, at this juncture, this isn't something that we can vote on because it's not on the agenda, but absolutely, I think we need to have a deeper conversation. So at our next.
When do you anticipate we could have that deeper conversation? Because I think
I
there's
was-
urgency.
So does that mean, well, I can email the LSC as far as availability. My first thought was at the next regular LSC meeting. But if you feel like, this is something we need to look at in the next week or two to get together, I can send out a doodle and see what availability is for the council.
Yeah, I think this is like a multi-step, approach. There's some things that we can knock out fairly quickly and decide what kind of protocols we want to have, because there's some, very important comments there about inclusion. But you pointed out the LSC guide. This is kind of like, looking at encyclopedia in the age of Google, right? Like these terms in the guide do not reflect what we've been through for the past year and a half of the pandemic. So that would be sort of like the second step too. As a school, we want to abide by the guide, but also recognize the guide is kind of dated. So there's several things that we need to consider there. So I would say, again, I would suggest a two-pronged approach. Number one, let's fix what we can fix now. And number two, let's talk about the bigger picture. It's not just Zoom, like in September, knocking on all kinds of wood here, we're gonna be back in person. What is these meetings gonna look like in terms of inclusion, in terms of, I've, for the past year now, we've averaged in the past, the first half of the year, when these meetings were not in person, we averaged 21, 18 people. Now we're double that, easy, right? So what's that gonna look like when we return back in person? So there are a lot of things that we can, that we need to address that go beyond that. And as you recall, last meeting, there were some, there was also, don't mean to put parents on on the spot here, but there were, there's been many requests or many calls for accessibility. So this is also one aspect of that. Many things to discuss. So I would, again, suggest that we kind of take a look at it in several ways.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Matthew.
And I would like to request that we do something before the next LSC meeting. I think it's an important enough topic for us to have a meeting and come to an agreement.
Okay.
I think,
Well, can
sorry,
we-
I've been,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
thank you, Trey. First of all, I want to thank Nicole for her comments. I really appreciate and agree with them. So a couple of the few of the issues that have been brought up, OMA accessibility have a legal side that I would not be comfortable with proceeding tonight without getting input from the Office of LSC Relations. And I also don't see the justification for going into closed meeting to continue to discuss this. I don't understand how we could, because of OMA, justify. Like, this doesn't seem to be a personnel issue. So that's a concern, and I would want to get input from Office of LSC Relations before deciding to move into a closed session to discuss this topic there.
Javier, I believe you're correct. I'm not sure that an LSC discussion can happen in closed session regarding this. I think, but I'm not positive. So I think we can ask Office of Local School Council Relations if this is a topic that can be discussed in closed session, but I agree with you. I'm not sure that it would fall under those guidelines. Another way to approach it is to have 3 LSC members meet alongside an Office of Local School Council Relations rep to talk through the concerns and make recommendations to the council that could then be shared at an upcoming meeting.
Ms. Amy, thank you. Whether it's in closed session or not, I just would like us to be able to give this the time that it needs and us to come together as a council to honor the teachers who have spoken up and feel that this is an issue. So whether it's closed session or not, Mr. Seawright, I understand we need to follow law. I just want to make sure that we give this topic enough attention so we can come to an agreement.
Thanks.
I just want to
Sorry.
add, I feel like there's 2 different things that we're talking about here. There's the accessibility conversation and the legal conversation, which I like Principal Amy's suggestion of having 3 LSC members meet with the Office of Local School Council Relations to learn more about how we can be better in that area. But then there's also just kind of this disagreement about what type of comments are appropriate and what type of comments aren't appropriate. And we already have a system in place to, monitor the chat and to remove people who are making inappropriate comments. And it's just a matter of, there's a disagreement about, some people think there were inappropriate comments made and some people don't. And I feel like this is the perfect kind of conversation to have with the anti-racist consultant, because I think it's an issue that she could help us with.
Ms. Granicki, you put in there that there's someone monitoring the chat. If you go through the chat dialogue and you read even the private comments, there are some instances where the monitor was hesitant about whether things could continue in the chat. Someone said that those were not harmful. That's one person's interpretation. We cannot just go off of the basis of one person's interpretation. We need to acknowledge the other teachers and who have used their voice. So what I'm proposing is that maybe the monitoring of the chat is not working as best as it could for us. So, I mean,
You know, again,
Thank you.
can we, I do think this is an important issue, and there are layers to this. But we're not going to come to a conclusion tonight. We are not going to force a decision one way or the other. So can we table this discussion, focus back on the budget? And that, I think what I heard the chair said was that she'll send out a doodle poll if it's going to be a close or if it's not going to be a close, but she'll send it out afterwards so we can focus back on the budget for tonight.
Yes, thank you, Mr. I agree with you, Tremaine. I just want to make sure that the doodle poll is going to be sent out. And I understand
She just said it was going to be sent
I
out. We're still in session, so let her give her,
excuse me,
let's give her that moment.
I understand this is a budget
Thank
meeting.
you.
I communicated to Aisha that this was important enough to put on the agenda. So that's all I was asking, because I felt that this was important. So as long as the doodle poll is going to come out and this is going to get acknowledged, then I'm fine with tabling it. But I felt that it was important enough to put on this agenda. And I don't appreciate being kind of told like, well, this is just a budget meeting. This is something that came to us, and my job as the teacher rep is to be here for the voices of the people that can't speak. So as long as we're going to put the doodle poll out, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Jerry, you have my commitment. As I indicated earlier, I will follow up with a doodle.
Okay, great.
Miss-
Thank you.
Sure. Miss Amy, were you gonna, sorry, go ahead.
I want to clarify because I heard mixed things. So we're following up with where this would be addressed by the whole council versus as a subgroup of the council. I'm wondering, do we want to have like a subgroup meet first to then bring it to the council and make recommendations based off of a meeting with OLSCR, or do we want just everybody together to go through it? Sometimes it's hard to make decisions with a large group, and so that's where I'm wondering, we may be more productive if a small group met, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear, that Aisha's clear, so that there's no miscommunication between now and the next meeting.
How do the rest of folks feel? Bill, Elisa?
I still need some clarity about what it is that we're talking about. It sounds like there's a desire to talk about, to check the legality, and I appreciate the distinction that Nicole made, that there's two conversations happening. So I'm fine to let a few members of the council who are interested in finding the legal parts out about accessibility and getting back to us. And I think there's another conversation about respectful comments, appropriate use of the chat in terms of that tone. Is someone suggesting that we're having we can't have a closed meeting about that, but a special meeting about the chat function? Is that what's on the table?
Yes. And the discussion has been to have a special meeting to address this issue prior to the regular meeting at the end of May. And that there's some interest, Ms. Amy's asking about this, if we should put together a subcommittee to address the issue with OLSCR to report back to the council recommendations. So my question,
that special meeting that would be ahead of time would be public, right? I mean, there would have to be.
Yes.
So
Yep.
So I don't understand why. Well, I mean, we're in a meeting right now, so either we should discuss it then, or we should discuss it as part of the regular meeting. I don't understand the purpose of a special meeting when there's a regular meeting that's also public.
I think, Mr. Kennedy, the purpose was that the focus of this meeting was primarily.
That's my dad. Who's Mr. Kennedy? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was told multiple times that the purpose of this meeting was primarily budget. So that is what I think is wanting the urge to table this. And I understand that. We just need to make sure this is getting the attention it deserves. So whether it's a special meeting, whether it's now or whatever, I want to make sure that this is something we deal with. So I think that's why, because this was supposed to be a budget meeting and this was not on the meeting under that context.
So
okay.
I was just going to say, for purposes of time, if council members, if you are interested in, being a part of that subcommittee, because I'm not sure we've kind of come to a consensus on what folks are interested in that subcommittee, please email me, and I will work to coordinate that. Ms. Amy is going to follow up with OLSCR regarding sign language accessibility. But I think at this juncture, it's 6:45, and I know, you know, budget was kind of the reason for this special meeting, but I think at this juncture, we probably should move to public participation unless others have something to say. So, okay, we're going to move to public participation. So for the folks that are interested in speaking, please type stack. And looks like first up will be Robin and then Gina.
Thank you. A quick clarification. So the Chicago Public Schools Policy Manual includes the Americans with Disability Act policy adopted December 11th, 2019. I personally sent this to the Peirce LSC Communication Subcommittee, and so it does specifically reference meetings in Section 8, Section 8, subsection D and E. That D describes, you know, the requirements for sign language interpretation if requested, and E describes the process. It basically is just 2 business days of request prior to the scheduled event, and that the a designated contact would contact the ADA office, the CPS ADA office to manage that. So if that helps to fast forward any questions, I'm happy to put the link to that in the chat as well for everyone to see. I think the communication subcommittee could be a good vehicle for moving the ball forward on and connecting some of these things. But just one quick comment from the perspective of a disabled parent is that it is very difficult to watch the chat and watch the transcript. So I'm trying to do that right now. And if I were to put on the live transcript, which gives me paragraphs of what was just said, if I happen to glance to the right, the subtitling disappears. It's only 3 rows high and it's very short. So you literally can't see both. And sometimes it's like watching 2 meetings at the same time. So I just want to share that as a perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. And I want to make sure I'm understanding. Thank you for doing that research. As it relates to CPS, the guidelines that you found, did they specifically reference local school councils in that?
Yes.
They did. Okay. Yeah. If you could drop it in the chat, I think for everyone that would be great. Because when I searched the LSC reference guide, of course, it makes, I haven't found anything in reference to that. And I want to make sure that we're addressing the concern that you raised, because you may not be alone in that need. And I know that the subcommittee has been meeting with you on that. So thank you for raising that issue. Next up is Gina.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I just want to thank Jerry and Evan for bringing this up in such a timely manner. I think it's important that these items do need to be addressed, and they are leading by example, that they are truly representing the people that have voted them in. And it is also a reminder, like Matthew said, that whether he agrees with the parents that he represents, he is willing to take in and listen and act upon what parents want, because that's who elected him. And I think as an LSC, we need to be reminded of that it's not just a group of 10, 20, 100. There are over 1,000 students in our school. And there's a reason why we have a parent rep, a community rep, teachers reps on this council. And I would just appreciate that you guys do continue to tackle these hard discussions, and let's continue to move forward with it, because these are tough discussions and they do need to happen. So I'm totally in support of that. So thank you for continuing to have these.
Thanks, Gina. Next up is Sean.
Hello. Thank you for recognizing me, and I appreciate this this conversation. I really appreciate Nicole's comments about kind of clarifying what it appears that now that it's not about the comments about white supremacy culture, but that was what was being discussed in the chat last week, and I'm kind of curious. At the end of the meeting last week, we've been hearing a lot again about harms done in the chat. If there's been any movement or any interest on the part of anyone in the teachers group in the PPLC, they were supposed to meet and talk about these issues that were brought up last time at the LSC about harm to parents and students and families here at Peirce. The harms that are harder for children to deal with than adults, and it strikes me that that conversation is now completely off the table. That the purpose here is just to talk about the chat and public participation, and whether we should be able to have the opportunity to sort of say anything.
Know that.
And so. This strikes me, as another one of those elements of that white supremacy culture. This sort of demand for comfort, that we don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable. We don't want to be made to kind of have these difficult conversations or to be taken to task for these conversations. And I'm really kind of stunned that what was discussed last time. What was brought up hasn't been more of the focus in the last 2 weeks than what happened in the chat, because I would think that would be a really important thing to talk about as teachers, as administrators at a school, and so that I'm actually fairly disappointed the last 2 weeks really, and I hope that, last week or last time someone said that, once you know better, you do better. And I'm hoping that kicks in soon. So thank you.
Aisha, can I respond to Mr. Johnson?
Sure. Go ahead.
Our next PPLC meeting is scheduled for May 17th, which is when we have scheduled to have the conversation that you referred to. We had a PPLC meeting, a special meeting on Monday, so Ms. Nemi could present her budget to the teachers because that needed to be done before this LSC meeting. So please know that we are addressing it at our next PPLC meeting. So it is a timely conversation. This conversation that we brought up this evening was timely because it was brought to us outside of PPLC meeting. It was brought to us via email, it was brought to us via text message by teachers, and it was brought to us in person. So the PPLC meeting is on May 17th is when we will have the conversation following up from the conversation that was had at the last LSC meeting about our partnership with ACE.
That's very good to hear. I'm looking forward to hearing the results of that conversation and some sort of resolution on that program, because we haven't heard from anyone else so far. So
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Evan. Next in the chat is Reagan.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate the time you give us to talk about this. And what I normally don't speak up, but I apologize as well because I did join about 15 minutes late. But I really want to thank Jerry and Evan for bringing that to our attention. I think our relationships with our teachers are really important. And the fact that one of the things I wanted to bring up is that what I'm hearing the differences is not the words. but when they're used in the chat and when it's brought up. I think Jerry said it very well when she said, when she's reading a letter and someone starts saying stuff in the chat, you know, that's tantamount to someone standing up in the middle of a meeting and talking, and that person would have normally been escorted out. I did attend the last meeting, and I found it extremely distracting when I was trying to listen to the letters from our teachers when people were saying stuff in the chat. I mean, I have been alongside the trying to be better myself and understanding the stance of white supremacy culture. But you know, it wasn't just people saying white supremacy culture. I believe someone said, "Oh Lordy," at one point in the chat when the teachers were talking, which I found extremely disrespectful.
It was me talking. I was reading a letter of a colleague, and it was time.
No, but in the chat it showed up as "Oh Lordy."
It was a reaction to the letter that I was reading.
Oh, okay, sorry. But I mean, I found that, thank you, Jerry, but I found that extremely disrespectful that someone would say that in the chat at the time when the teacher was reading it. It just didn't, to me, represent the Peirce community that I've known to love for the last 7 years. So I really do hope our local school council takes everything that Jerry and Evan is saying, because it really isn't just coming from, it really isn't just coming from the teachers. I've heard it from parents on the playground, other parents that attended the meeting. I think it's something that should be seriously discussed. And no one, again, is saying anything wrong about, you know, people raising the white supremacy culture, because we all understand it's tantamount to like how we've been raised, and we all like try to do better. And I know Sean and Megan and everyone has said, like, once you know better, you do better. And I completely agree with that. But I think here, having the chat open when other people are talking is kind of, and people start talking about what they're saying, it's tantamount to someone standing up in the meeting and talking over them. And I just find that disrespectful. So I felt the urge actually today to speak up about that. So I just wanted to share that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anne. Next up is John.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. You know, I just messaged April that I don't need to chat. Some of the comments have been already what some other people said, including Anne, what was what I was going to share. Thank you, though.
Okay, thanks, John. Joe Dunn.
Thanks. And my dog started to bark in the background, so apologize for that. Not really topical to the conversation, but one of the things that's been on my mind, and I wanted to say it in the meeting, is we're coming to the end of the year. We're coming up on graduation. And for my family, that means that my eldest, who's been at the school since pre-K, which is a frightening, I think, 11 years, is graduating. And she's had a really great time at Peirce. And we have as a family. And her graduating class, I don't know if results have been shared at all, but the kids are placing in all the top schools in the city. And I think it's really great. It shows what Peirce can be and the education that families and kids can get here. And I wanted to, thank and congratulate the teachers from Miss Fisher all the way on up. Mr. Gerard is the 8th grade teacher right now, and everybody in between, because they've done a great job. They've supported not just my daughter and her friends, but all the kids in her class. And these kids are excelling and they're succeeding, and they're going to go to great high schools and I think on to great careers. And while we're having difficult conversations and differences of opinion, I think we need to recognize some of the good things that are happening, or the great things that are happening. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And sort of coming back to topical things, I would say I was also at the last meeting, and if I was a new parent looking to come to Peirce, I wouldn't come to Peirce. The atmosphere at these meetings is hostile. I feel like hostility between the LSC and the teachers and the LSC and the administration. And I don't understand it, because I think maybe Anne touched on this. I think broadly in Peirce are all supporting the same beliefs and values, racial equity and inclusion and all that. I think we all support that. And I don't know why the conversation veers off the way it does. You know, the teacher trust is a really, really important thing in having a good school and having a functional school. And I feel like we're losing that. You know, kind of what I see right now, well, I'm happy for the 8th graders and everything that's happened. And I have really fond memories. What I see happening makes me sad because I don't understand it. You know, I think we're so close in what everybody believes, what I believe everybody believes, and we're struggling over implementation, right? I think, you know, I'd love to see that atmosphere change, and I'd love to see everybody work together. And I think that, you know, setting aside content of chat, I don't want to talk about the content of chat and all that. I want to talk about the big pictures. We got to come back together and figure out how we bring all of ourselves kind of in alignment, because I think we are in alignment. And I don't know why it's coming across like we're not. That's kind of all I got to say.
Thanks, Joe. Next is Chris.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great, thank you. So I hear the issues tonight of accessibility and protocol, and I agree that they're important. But I also want to bring the conversation back to the substance of what brought us together for the ACE discussion on the 29th. We have, as a community, we have heard and also dismissed accounts of harm from our BIPOC families. We respond to these comments with counter stories of not being harmed. And we're interested in talking about how things are said and are willing to miss what is said. And this makes me sad. I'm sorry for my friends whose harm just isn't important enough for us to overcome the discomfort and address it. So we are now an hour into a conversation about people being upset with how the stories were told. And yet we're still not addressing the fact that these stories happened and that we have that kind of lingering pain in our community. And that makes me sad. I really urge us to get back to that hard substance so that we can address it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Next up is Jonathan, and then Kate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan Baldwin. I teach K-4 Spanish at Peirce. My sentiments are pretty similar to Chris Overs, so thank you for speaking up, Chris. As a white identifying person, I don't feel harmed when white supremacy is being called out. From my perspective, from my past 2 years at teaching at Peirce, I felt like a sense of white fragility and defensiveness when someone speaks up about racial equity. And I believe that we all need some deep racial identity development because our Black and brown families are being harmed. And when we ignore this harm by centering our own feelings in a collective movement, we're causing more harm. So I agree with Chris that, you know, the conversation was about ACE, something that is harming BIPOC families. And it seems like that has shifted to something else that is like, just, it's been shifted. And I think we need to get back on track. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Next is Kate.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Hey, I'm Kate Bell. I teach first grade at Peirce. I'm hearing a lot of words about respectful and the tone and things like that. And I am learning in myself that respect is very like culturally located, and what is deemed respectful in terms of, you know, if we're more than one person talking at once is really culturally located. It's a a pretty like characteristic of white culture to have things be quieter and have one thing happen at a time. And that's not true in other cultures. And so I think I get really iffy. I mean, even in my own classroom about talking about, was that respectful or not? Because maybe that's respectful in their home or in their culture. And so really examining that as a class, and I think inviting us to examine that as a community about, you know, what do we mean by respect? Does that look the same for everybody? And I think, you know, maybe that's way too meta. But I think just reminding ourselves that there's not one standard of what respect looks like, that it can look different in different families and different communities is important.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, it doesn't look like anyone else is in the stack. So now we're going to move on to CIWP report and budget. Yes. Okay. I'm not quite sure, Miss Amy.
Veronica, can you go back to the Spanish line and ask that question and see if anybody self-identifies? Okay. Thank you, Veronica. Okay. I will share with the council the proposed budget for school year 22, along with updates to the school improvement plan. Some of this information is repetitive to our last meeting, but I wanted to make sure that anyone who was not able to attend the last meeting had some context before we moved into the discussion. So the first thing that I wanted to start with is to take a quick look at our poverty index over time. As you can see, from school year 19 to school year 22, our poverty index has fallen below 40. The poverty index is used to determine federal funding, also known as Title I funds. The district removes Title I funds from a school when the 2 years prior to the year that they are below 40 have also been below 40. So for school year 22, we are based off of school year 21 data, we are below the 40 mark for the poverty index. And therefore they then look at the 2 years prior, school year 1920 and school year 2021, where we were also below 40, and they have made the determination that we no longer qualify for Title I funds based off of the way that their grant with the federal government is written. When we look at our budget overview, you can see that our student-based budgeting dollars had an overall increase. This is in our first row going horizontally, an overall increase of 134,000. That increase essentially covers staff salary increases from one year till the next. So it essentially does not become an increase to our budget. Our poverty rate also declined, creating a $49,000 deficit within our supplemental state aid, which are additional dollars that come from the state. And then our Title I discretionary dollars, which is based off of our poverty index, we are allocated nothing for that this coming school year. We were allocated $250,000 the year before. And because we no longer qualify for Title I funds, we also do not qualify for the Title I parent involvement funds, which has been in place to support the Parent Advisory Council. because our poverty index has declined and we no longer qualify for Title I funds, the district provides something called Title II reduced class size to try and offset that decrease in Title I funds. We will still receive $1,000 to support our bilingual advisory council. And then we receive $51,000 to support teacher preparation periods through our pre-K program. So when all of that comes together, we have a deficit of 168,000, which is actually 300,000 because that 134,000 in this first row is essentially gone because of staff raises. In addition to that, we have also lost the pre-K lead teacher position, which was allocated to us 2 years ago to support the preschool expansion. The reason for that is the district is saying that they are allocating us an assistant principal position and a pre-K lead teacher. And through their equity-based funding process, they are only going to allocate one of those. So they are allocating to us a second assistant principal, that would support the pre-K program and no longer supporting the pre-K lead teacher. And then based off of our special education numbers, we would lose one special education classroom assistant. If our numbers show that that position is of need, I would appeal to the district, and they have been very responsive in reallocating positions. So based off of students graduating, students who have transferred out, currently we are allocated to lose one special education classroom assistant. Additional dollars coming our way through the stimulus funds allocated by the federal government. The district is allocating $132,000 to support programming from summer to the end of the school year. That money is not currently listed in our school budget, but it is something that we can vote on how we would like to spend it tonight, because we need these funds in order to have a budget that is functional. The other thing that we are allocated that does not require LSC approval is $82,000 to go towards out of school time funding. This would be to support summer and school year programming for students to help recover learning loss, but then also to support enrichment activities amongst our students. So we are in the process of identifying students that we would like to invite in for summer programming, and then we will also be able to begin planning to offer a robust after school program in the fall through the end of the school year. So after the last LSC meeting, and after I had initially shared the information with the staff, I informed the council that I would send out a survey to staff and families, considering that we have cuts. Where would people prioritize us to keep certain positions in place? So based on the survey results, the orange bar, the bar farthest to the left in each bucket, represents staff. The yellow bucket, which is the second bucket in each of those the second line in each of those buckets, represents parents. And then the green line, which is the third line in each of the buckets, represents the total. So in looking at the survey results, we had 53 staff survey responses and 94 parent survey responses. Keeping a full-time interventionist was the highest priority item, followed by hiring a second counselor. Currently, we have one counselor, and I had shared with the council and with the staff in prior meetings what the data says about appropriate ratios of counselors to students. And then the third was an arts-based position. Fourth was a second bilingual lead teacher. And then the last priority area was a second interventionist. So a couple things that I want to clarify with this information are, one of our arts-based teachers informed me on Monday that they were resigning from the district. And so with that information, that helped me in creating the plan that I will share to the council. So I feel like if we have somebody who's self-identified as a resignation, then that while it's a loss of programming to students, it also puts us in a position where we don't have to cut a program because that program has essentially been cut on their own. Also within our specials teachers schedule, we have primary grade and an upper grade specials track. On one of those tracks, teachers have 1 hour a day built into their schedule. So we can have those 4 teachers support some of the intervention work to make up for a potential loss of intervention and bilingual support. And we can split that between bilingual support and intervention support. So while we have like these cuts, it's sort of where can we then maximize supports? And that's one way to help offset a challenge that we're seeing in the fall. So my proposed organizational structure is that we would have and keep in mind that not all of these positions are paid for through school funds. A lot of these positions are actually district funded positions, but I'm just sharing what the overall school structure would look like for next year. 7 pre-K teachers and teacher assistants, 2 special education teachers for pre-K based off of the blended programs that the district has allocated us. Maintain 4 classrooms per grade level, kindergarten through 8th grade. Have 2 PE teachers, 2 Spanish teachers, 2 art teachers, 1 dance teacher, 1 music teacher, 1 tech teacher / coordinator. The district funded 14 special education teaching positions and then 13 special education classroom assistants. Have 1 interventionist, 1 bilingual lead teacher, a half-time interventionist / bilingual support staff member, 2 counselors, 1 PYP coordinator, 1 case manager, 1 restorative practices coach, and then 2 APs that are both district funded positions. What that would mean in terms of cuts is that we would be losing the pre-K lead teacher, which previously was board funded, the board funded special education classroom assistant, cut 1 music position, and then that half-time position that I indicated above could support both intervention and bilingual. So then we would be losing a total of like 1.5 positions, but then keeping in mind that specials teachers will be able to support and offset some of that intervention. So it's like we're losing a half-time intervention bilingual lead position. Other things that need to be taken into consideration within the budget are funds to support substitutes, extended day pay, miscellaneous employees to support lunch, recess, and academic support and school supplies. And this is very bare bones. It's not looking at teacher professional development or conferences. These are just like general buckets that we would need to look at. So when we look at the budget as a whole, 99% of our budget is actually allocated towards staff salaries. And so from our board funds, it's all essentially going to staff. 100% of those funds would go to staff. Over $5 million towards positions, and then $52,000 to support the miscellaneous employees. And then use the stimulus funds that will be available in the summer, allocate those funds for substitutes, the remaining amount for miscellaneous employees, extended day play, and then some of that to go towards supplies. And then we have money in internal accounts that we would move over into a budget line to support supplies and the anti-racist consultant to support teacher professional development and curriculum review. The lines that those funds would come from in internal accounts are the lost damaged library books, Gust Foundation, student pictures, school store, student fees, and building lease income. I'm going to pause there and see if the council has any questions about the budget before I move into the CIWP.
Sorry, Miss Amy, can you just address, I was trying to take notes and I apologize. You said that the 132,000 that has not been allocated through the funds, that doesn't address any of those positions. Is that correct?
What the
Right.
district said is they cannot guarantee that we can use those funds to open a position. They haven't given clearly defined rules for the allocation of those funds. So we should prioritize staffing positions through our school funds. And then whatever other non-staffing needs, non-teacher, full-time staffing needs, to then use the 132,000, which is why is this not going? Which is why I'm suggesting to use the stimulus funds, the 132,000 that you're referring to, Trey, for substitutes, miscellaneous employees, extended day and supplies.
And Ms. Amy, I'm sorry, Trey, did Ms. Amy answer your question before I jump in?
Yeah, I'm just processing, so please go ahead.
And I, at least maybe for purposes for the community, there's no way for us to appeal the decision, for the federal and state funds because of the poverty rate declining, with the pandemic. There's nothing at this juncture that we can do to appeal that decision.
Right. I met with the budget department last week and I asked that question and they said that Title I funds cannot be appealed because like the metrics are the metrics and it's based off of their federal grant and the way that that's written. And because we're able to cover all classroom positions, teacher preparation periods, and still have non-classroom teaching positions in place, that we wouldn't qualify for a program appeal because we still have a pretty robust program. I mean, it's still a loss to us, but it's still a robust program and we still are able to offer, some quality aspects for our students. A lot of quality aspects to our students. Just, the fact that we can have 2 counselors, we can still have intervention, we can still have support for English language learners. That's a good position to be in.
Go back to the graph that you put up. And so what we're saying is the orange and the yellow add up to the green for each one of these categories.
That's correct.
So the majority of the staff put more emphasis on the counselor then?
The vast majority of staff were in favor of an interventionist first.
Oh, sorry, yes, correct.
Followed by, I think, interventionist 2. It's hard to distinguish. Actually, I'm sorry. Followed by an arts-based position. So interventionist 1, arts-based position, interventionist 2, counselor, bilingual.
An arts-based position, are we talking, is it music? Is it dance? Which one is it?
In this case, it would be in this case, my proposal, because we have 1 music teacher resigning from the district, it would be to cut 1 music position. So that means that students have 4 specials classes at a time. We're on, who knows what rotation will be on next year, but we have 4 classrooms per grade level. And so we know we need to have at least 4 specials teachers that can support those classes. So that's Spanish, art, PE. So students would have those classes all year long. And then they would have half of the year music and half of the year dance.
Got it.
Principal Amy. Oh, are you done, Matthew?
That's right. So I wanted to kind of hear, perhaps from Jerry or Evan, what are your thoughts on the survey results?
So Miss Amy presented this proposal to the PPLC on Monday. We solicited feedback from the entire staff on whether teachers agreed with her proposal. 83% of the teachers agreed that this was a good plan for staffing for next year. There were only a few teachers who had some other thoughts of what was needed.
And there is also a trend of concern with pre-K, losing our pre-K lead teacher and making sure that we have enough coverage for pre-K. That was definitely a concern as well.
So when we say coverage, because the pre-K enrollment is a little bit different than regular, so they come from many places, is that why? Because there's gonna be even more kids that they're gonna be responsible for?
I think the issue is that we're gonna have an off-site location with 4 classrooms, 3 classrooms at the main building, making sure that there's still the support in place to support the pre-K team in the off-site location, which is where Ms. Munoz will need to spend more time than she has in the past. And then that's, I think, the biggest concern that I'm hearing.
And also making sure that the pre-K students are able to get all of their specials in as well with such a tight, turnaround of everyone covering classes and intervention and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Principal Amy, can you speak a little bit more broadly about how your proposed cuts align with the survey results? That's one.
Yep.
And two, well, I'll let you speak and then I have a follow-up.
Okay, so if you see here, interventionist 1 and counselor were the 2 highest rated positions that people wanted to keep. And so those positions are allocated in the budget. So I used this information to determine because we couldn't have everything that was put out there. And so seeing that intervention and counselor were the 2 highest priority areas, those were the 2 areas that I focused on. And then cut the additional music teacher position, and then am taking the bilingual lead and interventionist position and turning that into we would have then 1 bilingual lead, 1 intervention, and then have a half-time position to support that bilingual lead and intervention. Had the music teacher not said that they were resigning, my proposal may have been different. But with that information, it just seemed like we can kids can still have access to music, art, dance, Spanish, PE. They're not losing access to that. They're losing access in middle school. Middle school is actually the only place that would be affected. It limits the type of elective model we're able to provide to our middle school students. We're still looking to provide some form of an elective model in middle school, but it would not be the model that existed the last couple of years.
So you said that we're eliminating the second music teacher position. And so what would that look like if we were to align the cuts to try to keep that role and make the cuts to better align with the survey results? So would we be seeking to hire a second music teacher and then, so I'm just.
We would be looking to do a half-time music teacher position, not have a half-time bilingual interventionist position. That would be the change. Because we can't afford a 3rd full-time position. We only have that half that we can work with. So either way, we would be cutting 1 position from a full-time to a half-time. So we would then look at a half-time music instead of a half-time bilingual interventionist.
And what would it look like if we were to get more support for the pre-K program?
I'm not sure that I'm understanding.
Oh, so right now we're eliminating the concerns of the teachers for the not having enough support for the pre-K. We have that pre-K lead that you said were if we were to fund that pre-K lead, what would we have to cut?
either a counselor or an interventionist.
Okay, thank you.
Miss Amy, is it, I don't know if this is appropriate time to ask, but it says, we had a couple of questions in the chat, like, can you clarify what is the percent of teacher and parent respondents?
So there were 53 staff responses. I'm not sure if those were teachers or teacher assistants. We have 75 teachers on staff and over 100 staff members if you look at our miscellaneous employees. Parents is 94. I believe I said 94. Yes, 94 parent responses. We have over 1,000 students in the school. I mean, if you look at each, if each child had 2 parents that responded that, but then we also have multiple children in a family, it's hard for me to gauge what percent of responses this actually entails.
And then there was another question from a teacher on YouTube. Can you say how many parents were surveyed? And what about the parents that were without email or internet? Was it just a electronic based survey?
It was just electronic based. This is the common challenge that we have. And it was emailed out to families. That was the form that it went out in.
Okay, thank you. And then the last, there's one more question. How many bilingual students do we have? Someone is asking about that.
When are we saying by like students in the bilingual program?
I'm not sure, maybe that person.
Yeah, because my kids are bilingual. They wouldn't be included in here. So I think they're talking about folks that are, I would surmise that folks that are actually enrolled in those programs.
It's under 200. I don't know the exact number. Maybe 160 students are enrolled in the bilingual program. But also to clarify, a bilingual lead teacher would not service all of the students in the bilingual program. So there's only some students that the bilingual lead teacher would support based off of scheduling model and student need. So we have 1 or more bilingual certified teachers at every grade level. And almost all of our teachers pre-K through 5th grade have their ESL endorsement.
So from your perspective, based on the numbers that you have there, so 99% of the budget is accounted for that goes into the pool for the teachers and staff. You know, obviously this is an unprecedented decrease or situation where we're losing these Title I funds. I think I'm curious to hear your perspective. I see your proposal, but beyond that, how do you feel about this year, this upcoming year? And, in the past, you've been able to work magic around moving monies around where, to best benefit the kids. What's your outlook for what's coming up? Are we in dire straits? Is this really is it bad versus, or is it, are we somewhere in the middle? What's your take?
I think it's not as bad as I initially thought. I will say that when I initially saw that $300,000 deficit, I was very concerned and I wasn't sure that we would be able to have any positions outside of the classroom. So the fact that we can have 4 classrooms per grade level, we have some grade levels that have, it's sort of like a borderline grade where you could combine them and make 3 classrooms versus having 4. There's 2 grade levels like that. The fact that we can continue to have 4 classrooms per grade level and not combine them is a good place to be in. The fact that our children can still have Spanish, art, PE, music, dance is a good place to be in. The fact that we can still have a restorative practices coach we can still provide intervention. We can increase to 2 counselors, still, like those are really great things that we can continue to offer. I am curious what happens with our budget in future years as we have an increase in pre-K students enrolled in our school. That may increase poverty index to where we may qualify for Title I funds. Without the stimulus money that we're receiving this year, we would be in more dire straits. We would be looking at a much bigger cut, and without internal counts, we'd be looking at a much bigger cut. So those are 2 sort of like pieces in place for this coming school year that are helping us significantly. So we do need to look at in future years, if we don't qualify for Title I funds, how do we then supplement that, you know, 210,000 that we get through the stimulus money and then what we're pulling out of internal accounts? So do we push harder on school fees? That's something that I haven't felt comfortable doing in my entire time as principal. Or do we look at fundraising? Do we look at ways to increase building lease income? That's another way that people have fundraised. We've had this partnership with the YMCA. They pay us rent for using our school building. Do we need to look at doing more of that? So I think, what are the ways that we can then look at bringing additional revenue to the school? I think in going into next year, while it's a change, we're still in a good place.
In final question, I may have asked that already, so my apologies. We're hearing that the district is gonna be sitting on additional monies. You know, the proverbial 1.8 billion or whatever it is that they're supposed to be getting. Is that what that stimulus money that you're showing is reflecting, or is that something additional, or are we getting none of it? What's that?
As far as I know, this is all we're getting, but there are these pools of money that they are finalizing a plan on. So the district has allocated a percentage of that to schools directly, and then they have offered like the out of school time funds is another thing that money is going towards. And then there were a couple other things and they just slipped my mind. There were some places that money was definitely being allocated for, but what we see in our budget is about $210,000 of that large amount coming to the district.
Sammy, you may have answered this, but do you know how many lottery students will get? Or you may have answered it, and I apologize if you have.
So that's something that we have to watch over the summer. This past year, so our current kindergarten numbers are very low. We've got approximately 20 students per classroom versus 28. My prediction is that a lot of families just chose not to enroll because we were in the pandemic. And we also did not accept students from the lottery at all because we were in a pandemic, with the exception of siblings. And so based on enrollment over the summer of students going into first grade, I would then have to watch numbers to determine if we are going to bring students in through the lottery. And the reason is that we were allocated, our per pupil funds were allocated based off of, I believe, 994 students, if you look in this 2021 student-based budgeting. But the 10th day numbers that they pulled only had 952 students. So the district actually awarded us for 42 students that we didn't have enrolled, as just trying to keep that number in place. So for the following year, we do need to try and be at 994, excluding pre-K at the 10th day.
I lied when I said last question. In this budget, is there any money from this year that can be rolled over or carried over from any and all sources? Anything?
The district
any Tetris we can play around?
The district allows $0 to be rolled over from one school year to the next. You have to spend everything, otherwise they take it.
And then similar to what Jerry did, I think there were a couple of questions in there that I'd like to bring up. One was whether the district would fund specials in, for purposes of maintaining the International Baccalaureate credentials.
We are able to fulfill the IB requirements with our current structure. So to request anything more I'd say it's very unlikely that it would happen.
And then briefly, just in the spirit of addressing all the questions there, your next slide or a couple slides in where you put the percentages. So what we're voting on right now is 1% really of the school budget, or are we saying? So I think it was one more. Where we, I mean, your number 99% kind of resonated with me as well. So we're voting on the 1%, or are we? What are we voting on? I mean,
So what we're voting on is essentially my proposed organizational structure. So we're voting on saying that this is the organizational structure that we agree with. We agree that these are the positions that we should have in place for next school year. We're agreeing that these are, with the exception of the pre-K lead teacher and the special ed classroom assistant, because we have no control over that. We're agreeing that we would cut 1 music, 0.75 intervention, 0.75 bilingual. We are agreeing that we would allocate the board funds with this over 5 million amount towards positions, and then 52,000 towards miscellaneous employees, that we would allocate the stimulus funds as outlined here, that we would move money from internal accounts as noted on this page to support supplies and the anti-racist and consultant. That's what we would be voting on when we're voting on approving the budget.
And I mean, the 99 would still be the same. Like it wouldn't be changing much, right? We're talking 99.8, 98.5, whatever. It's usually like that. And this is fairly common, or is it budget-wise across the district?
It's common that positions are the vast majority of the budget. I could look at historical budgets. We've never had 99% of our dollars going towards staff salaries. Generally, we would have money towards supplies, money towards miscellaneous employees, money towards professional development.
But that's also offset by the fact that we're getting less money, so that the impact or the proportion of the board funds is de facto heightened.
Yep.
I have one final question.
For real, thank you.
Matthew, come on. Just kidding. I have one more question, but I see that Bill's unmuted. Bill, do you want to ask your question first?
Go for it, Javi. I'll go.
Thank you, Bill. So just for understanding the scope, like I appreciate the way that you've laid this out as far as roles that are being cut. But if you had to put a dollar figure on another arts, another arts teacher, or also the pre-K lead teacher, what dollar amounts would you put on that?
Average teacher cost is $100,000, and that's average. So some slightly below, some slightly above.
Okay. And so the halftime, would that be 50,000, or would that be?
That's correct.
Thank you so much.
So just building off that, can you, and maybe I know there's some Friends of Peirce folks in the audience. I know we didn't raise funds this year, supplemental. Can you remind us, can Friends of Peirce money be used for positions?
They
like,
could,
for example, for that 50,000?
They could, if that was the direction that Friends of Peirce wants to go in. That has
Right.
not been the way that Friends of Peirce has identified as a means of allocating money. They've tried to put in more programs than positions.
In part because we've been able to fund the positions with other dollars, though, probably, right? Or I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speculate, but we haven't had that need.
I
in the
think
same way.
part of it is when you get into funding positions, it becomes very personal. And sometimes it becomes, we're going to fund it because we like this person versus, and then when it comes time to cutting it, I think part of it has been that like personal connection to it. Versus if Friends of Peirce said, we'll pay $82,000 in supplies and the anti-racist consultant, then that frees up, $97,000 that goes towards a position, and then it's not in the hands of Friends of Peirce at that point.
So I guess I think I know this has been a challenging time economically for everybody, but I think the underlying message here that I'm understanding from the poverty shift is that the average income of a typical Peirce family is going up. And so it seems like, one possibility would be for people with more means, and I would put my family in that too. I'm not asking for others to do something that I'm not willing to do, but there's more families with more means in Peirce's community. It seems like the fundraising should then reflect that. In my opinion, I'm not asking it as a question. I think I'm saying, like, I'm hoping that continues to be the case. The reason that we have Title I funds is to ensure that there's some attempt to sort of provide for families with less means in schooling, right? So, but Peirce is shifting in terms of that. So, so I wonder if there can be some concerted effort on Friends of Peirce to appeal to the broader community to sort of make this case, to point out the fact that there is a budget cut, in part because the income level of the school is no longer qualifying for Title I. And so I don't know, I'm just hoping that Friends of Peirce can kind of craft that narrative, and that there's an opportunity for people to raise more money this year.
At the time of Medicare Part D, that was called filling the donut hole.
Bill, I think that I'm glad that you said that, because I find myself personally torn with the budget because we are shifting and what have you. I find myself thinking about the schools that are not shifting and, receiving some of the same budget cuts or not as many budget cuts, but yet don't have the families to supplement it. So it's very interesting coming from a school that was closed previously, is in one way it's nice that they're shifting and what have you, but then we lose funds. But then you also think about, what about the schools that don't get any funds, and what about the schools that don't have that shift? So I'm glad you brought up that point. I think that's definitely something to think about.
Can someone speak to the latest with Friends of Peirce, like how much money we have in that account and what it is earmarked for? And I was wondering, along the same lines of, you said, Miss Amy, that you can't roll over funds. Having recently done the LSC trainings, I'm recalling that they said the Friends of groups weren't supposed to roll over funds either. So I'm wondering if we have spent all of our funds that
I'm
are.
not sure what their balance is right now, but it's not very high. They just approved to install the hand washing station in the lunchroom, but there's not a significant amount of money in their account because we haven't fundraised.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I had a few questions too. I was wondering, in this budget overview, where is that $80,000 out of school funds? Where does that fit into this overview?
So these are funds that will be available over the summer from July 1st to June 30th, and they would go to create after school programs. So the money is not needed to be voted on because we know how those funds will be allocated.
Okay, so that's not included in that budget overview. That's in addition to those numbers?
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And I was wondering if you could speak to kind of the combined interventionist bilingual lead role. So am I understanding correctly that that's a part-time, that's like one person working part-time who's doing both of those things?
It's one person who would be half-time, that is correct. And we would look at our caseload of students that require interventions, some who may require support from a language development standpoint, and some who may require it from a reading or math development. And then based on our student needs, we then create schedules that staff members would support.
And can you speak to kind of, I guess, like if it makes sense, or could we find somebody who would fit that description, who could do both of those things, just not really knowing, you know, the job description or kind of what that would look like? Like, are we putting two roles together that, you know, kind of make sense to be put together?
So it's possible that we will be able to. If we're not able to, then we need to come back together as a council and say, and I would say we're in a position where there is not a candidate that can fill this, and then look at reallocating it. But I think my proposal is to start and look to see if we can fill that, and then if we cannot, then meet and revise that.
Okay, thank you. And one more thing about the out of school funds, I think you had mentioned at our last meeting how that might actually be more than we've typically allocated because it's coming from the stimulus money. Can you speak to that, of kind of what additional resources we might be gaining there?
Every year we are allocated approximately $30,000 to support after school program. So 82,000 is, you know, more than double what we typically receive, which will allow us to offer summer and a longer and more intensive after school program.
Great, thank you. That reminds me of another question too. On the overview slide, you have the something long, like about the longer day. Can you talk about what that is?
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question, Nicole.
I think on your last slide. Let me see. Oh, extended day, $15,000. Can you just speak to what that is?
Yeah, so that would be if we need clerks to work over the summer, or staff members to work on a project or professional development. It provides us to be able to, it's a very small amount to be able to supplement some of those out of like regular job description workload requests.
Okay. And then my last question is kind of when it comes to supplies and miscellaneous employees and substitutes, are these a decrease from what we've had in previous years?
Substitutes is, so the substitute is about what we have had in years past. In some years we've had less than that. The reason that the amount is the way that it is because of the curriculum review and development work that's happening. This would allow teachers to be released to be able to plan and finalize their units. The miscellaneous employees, on average, we spend a little over $100,000 for those positions to support the lunch and recess times. So these are typical expenses.
Thank you.
Ms. Amy, could you, going back to earlier conversation, and I don't know if it was Bill or who raised that question, but you were alluding to there was discussion about funding the position through fundraising, and that there might be a personal attachment to the person in the position. Is that, I just want to make sure I heard that clearly and understood.
That's something that I've heard from other friends of groups and our friends of group, is that when you get into funding positions, there is that personal element to it.
And so can you elaborate more on, I'm just on the outside looking in, trying to understand if the position is vacant. There's no one in it, but going forward, like, can you expand a little bit more on that connection? Because the hope would be, I think going forward, you know, you mentioned that the classroom sizes were smaller, at least as far as kindergarten was concerned. And if more students are coming back, we might in fact see that poverty index go back up as far as at least pre-K is concerned. So I'm wondering about, I want to make sure I understand that connection to, you know, if Friends of Peirce were involved in, you know, fundraising for that position, where that kind of concern about a personal connection comes into play.
Sure. So say I want to open a teacher assistant position. I then want influence of who goes into that position. And I really like Aisha, so I want Aisha to be hired and staffed in that position. We've now hired and staffed Aisha. We don't like Aisha any longer. We now want to cut that position because we don't like Aisha and we don't want Aisha working in that position.
But they wouldn't have the ability to cut the position. I mean, of course, they could say, you know, we're going to reprioritize and move the funds elsewhere, but they wouldn't per se be able to cut the position.
If they are no longer fundraising to support the position, they've cut the position.
Okay. Okay. I think Bill does raise an interesting question, you know, conundrum for us as a community, because that poverty rate has gone down significantly because in our community, you know, we're a more resourced community, more and more so every year. So yeah, are there other folks in the council with questions?
Personally, I would rather us look at ways that we can capitalize on building lease income. It takes that personal, it takes away that personal attachment to individuals, and it takes away stress on constantly trying to tap into the parent community. So how can we leverage building lease income and bring more revenue in that way, and then still have whatever fundraising exists to support specialized programs?
What are some other ways? You mentioned the after school, was it the YMCA that leases the space for after school? What are some other ways that it could be used? The building could be used.
Some schools rent out to churches, rent out to more than one after school program. Sometimes there's like cell phone towers placed on schools. Some schools have rented out parking spaces, although I will not say that that is, I wouldn't support a parking space idea for like, I don't even know if zip cars are around anymore, but people were doing that. But maybe there is a way to rent out like spots in the lot overnight with the expectation that they're out by 6 a.m., can come in at 4 p.m. That could be something to explore. Offering like fee-based programs, like our own fee-based program within our school for like summer, weekend, after school programs, tapping into other community-based vendors that may want to use that space. It's like another, it requires another area of focus. And how do we then have the power to make those connections?
Lori, I just was intrigued when you said parking lot. Our school is in a pretty hip area. So on the weekends, what is is it ever used for parking, because I know like on Division Street, LaSalle, like you can park there on the weekends for restaurants and stuff. Is that ever something that happens at Peirce?
the church rents our parking lot. They haven't, I think, over the last year because of COVID, but in the past they've rented it on Sundays and one evening during the week.
So about the personal attachment comment that was made, is there a way to, instead of saying this was going to go to fund a particular position, can that go towards supplies or something that's comparatively similar?
I think that's a discussion that can be had with Friends of Peirce and see, is that something that they're open to exploring? I think that's an open, I think that I can't make those decisions. I think we can have those cross-group conversations. And then also looking at like our student fees, right? Maybe we do need to put a little bit more effort in the student fees. While I haven't, I don't find that a very appealing part of the job, hounding people for money. It just doesn't feel right. But maybe trying to do it in a way that doesn't hound people, but also just brings attention that says, please consider paying this fee.
As not a Peirce parent, what are the yearly fees for a student?
I honestly cannot remember right now. It's either $25 or $50, maybe $100 maximum per family.
I feel like when we enrolled, it was $50 fee.
From the
25 per kid.
From the teacher perspective though, Ms. Amy, I would agree with you on that because I do not like when you have to ask for fees from students. When have it's one thing asking for lunch forms, health forms and other things, but I do not like having to keep dunning for fee money. So I would agree on that.
Fees seem very regressive. And there are some families that can afford it a lot easier than others.
Exactly, Javier. So it's like, how can we do it where those that can do and those that can't are not bothered?
Thank you.
Other questions from the council?
Is there anything we didn't consider from your standpoint? Anything?
I think we do need to start exploring other ways of increasing revenue within our school's budget. So I think that would be the next step. Is what are these ways that we can bring in additional dollars? Have a conversation with Friends of Peirce to explore where we're at, strategize around the student fees. I think it's a matter of how do we bring additional revenue in our building. And then also looking at what our enrollment looks like over the next year and how does the pre-K expansion impact poverty rate. Do you want me to move into CIWP now?
I'm wondering, it's 8 o'clock. We haven't had, everyone here hasn't had a bio break yet or just a minute to step away. So, and maybe we can be back in 5 minutes.
Sure.
It's 8:01. So everybody run for it, back at 8:06.
Aisha, can you tell if everybody's back?
I was just looking at the cameras. I think we're waiting for Bill, Javi, Jerry, Matthew, Nicole, and Trey. Oh, no, Trey is here.
Okay.
Let's see his camera's on.
Present.
Let me know when you think I should continue.
Okay. Bill, are you out there? Jerry? Like, it's
I'm
7
here.
after. Okay, there's Bill. Thanks, Bill. And I think Jerry's joining us. Okay, I think you're good to go.
Okay. So shifting into CIWP, I can't remember honestly how much I had gotten into at the last meeting and how much of this is new. So it's possible that some of this is a repeat. So let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow. So there's 3 priority areas within our school improvement plan. The reason that we are looking at our priority areas and making amendments to our CIWP is as a result of remote learning and knowing that there were certain things that we weren't able to accomplish over the last year within our school improvement plan, but then also in looking at using to measure the goals that we've set. So formative assessment, differentiation, and culturally relevant curriculum are 3 of our larger sort of topics within our CIWP. The first one that I will recap are amendments that myself along with PPLC are recommending be revised within this school improvement plan. The first one is that the theory of action is mainly intact with the exception of the metrics that we are using to measure our theory of action, and that is shifting from the use of map data because we do not have a map data point for last school year or this school year to an on-track measure. The other is within this action plan, I indicated where we are keeping as is and then where we are shifting language. So the shifts in language within the action steps are providing opportunities for teachers for teacher professional development and formative assessment through professional articles, peer observations, and lesson study cycles. So that became a combined action step, moving away from the use of like a book as a mentor text as a resource to more of a professional development cycle while we're utilizing professional articles. And then the other one is the third line down. We moved away from more of a rigid system of teachers utilizing formative assessment, but to where teachers would develop grade level and classroom-based formative assessments, review data, and plan for targeted instruction. And then new language is also developing a shared understanding of what formative assessment means. Creating a resource bank of planning strategies, modalities, and models, also shifted in language from just like a resource bank of planning structures to shift it towards strategies and then the different models. That was a new way of us looking at it. The interventionists would stay, vertical planning meetings would stay, and then examining learning communities is something that we're proposing to postpone. Within differentiation, where we're looking at supports for diverse learners and students enrolled in the bilingual program. Again, the theory of action stays the same with the exception of us moving from map to on-track data as the measure to monitor progression towards our goals. And then the action step language that we're proposing to adjust is in this first line, adjusting the language to read short articles versus mentor texts. And so that's in supporting teachers with strategies to support English language learners, and then the same modification to language in looking at ways that teachers will support students who are part of the diverse learner program using short articles versus a mentor text. And then the rest of that theory of action would stay the same. And then similar to the formative assessment model, shifting the language around teacher professional learning to one that's looking at professional development models, and for teachers to be able to engage in things like lesson study cycles, peer observations, and having look for tools that identify best practices in supporting students. In our culturally relevant curriculum theory of action, the theory stays the same. And again, the data that we're using changes from MAP to On Track. And the only change here is adding in a line that explicitly says hire an anti-racist consultant facilitator to support teacher professional development and curriculum development. And that was a proposal indicated within our school budget.
Is that the 15?
Correct.
So this is different than the facilitator that who spoke last time.
It may be the same facilitator, but it's a different allocation of funds. So I was in touch with Aisha and I think Claire and Dr. Fisher via email. Dr. Fisher should be receiving a vendor number any day. I had received a preliminary approval letter, so I'm not sure if she's received that. We would need to create a purchase order by May 21st because funds cannot roll over, and we would need to begin work with her before the school year ends so that she can be compensated for that work by June 30th. And then I met with the foundation and they were not able to give me a definitive answer when we met. And so they wanted some time to think about it. And I'm meeting with them tomorrow afternoon as a follow-up to see if they will support that, the remaining amount. So this 15,000 is different than that initial allocation. And this allocation would go directly towards teacher development versus LSC development.
Okay, so that position and also that consultant is currently not fully funded. It's what, half?
We were at, I think, 8,300 approximately is what we voted on. And then the proposal was about 16,000. And so that's tomorrow afternoon, I'll know the status on the remaining amount. And then the question is, if the foundation does not fund that remaining amount, then what?
Yes, that's the question.
Ms. Amy, is there, and maybe you said this already, I mean, is there any way to expand the scope of Dr. Fisher's current agreement to also support the teachers?
Yeah, that's possible. So that just needs to be decided on.
Okay.
By whom?
So I think we would need to look at what, I think involving the PPLC would be an important next step. There's also a professional development subcommittee that's meeting. So having that, and actually we have a meeting next week to debrief where we're at this school year and what we would like to see in moving forward. And I think also in partnership with like what are things that we would hope would come from that? Is Dr. Fisher the person that can support that? I think when Dr. Fisher was identified as a consultant, it was because she could support multiple groups, right? Like she would be a good person that could support the LSC, parents, teachers. So I would make the assumption.
Yeah, but I mean, right. I mean, we got 10 days, this person into, I mean, 10 calendar days. That's even fewer business days to get something in place. And we need approval or discussion with who? With the PPLC? With
No, no,
like
no.
how? What does that? How does that look like? If we were to sort of combine, sort of like the
Or expand.
in case it's not clear, I'm sitting here thinking we presented somebody or somebody came in and got presented to the community at large as coming in to help with the particular program. And now we're in the position where that position this particular program is at best halfway funded.
That's correct. We knew that when we approved the proposal, and we knew that we were going to wait to hear from the foundation on if they were going to fund the other half. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll have a definitive answer. Based on that answer, it will help us in knowing what we need to do next. Do we need to call a special meeting as a result of whatever that answer is? Is Dr. Fisher and is the LSC then in a position where we would say, we'll only go with that like 8,300 as a support for the LSC with the intention that 15,000 that's allocated for next year's budget would go towards teacher training and professional development. Is that 8,300 enough to support the LSC? And I think we would need to involve Dr. Fisher in that conversation.
I mean, does she? Yeah, I think I mean, given our short time frame and the use it or lose it deadline that we're broaching by the 21st, I mean, could we have preliminary discussions with her? Even, I mean, tomorrow. I mean, we have what 12 hours to find out to determine whether or not we're going to get the foundation money. But does she have the capacity to take on this scope of work? And as you're talking about the development for the PPLC and support, this is not something that I mean, you're not going to be doing it this quarter. So we still have the fall. So this would be kind of rolling over. It's just bringing in somebody, I don't know. It seems like we should be doing some simultaneous discussions with her to see.
Yeah, I mean, like we got,
Sorry.
I mean, I'm looking at timing. We got 6 days,
right.
6 business days.
So I think this is an
really
important
fine.
discussion, but I'm really uncomfortable with the direction that it's taking. It sounds like it's not up to the LSC who the PPLC works with next year. Yeah, and I would feel I'm just very uncomfortable with that.
Javier, I don't know. So when I had met with Aisha and Claire to talk about the anti-racist consultant, we had said that we wanted to identify somebody that could support in multiple areas.
Right.
And that's where teachers were involved in that. Like Evan was part of the subcommittee that reviewed proposals and identified someone. I feel like I am going to assume that we would want to have Dr. Fisher working with teachers based off of that involvement. I don't feel comfortable saying, yes, that's true. I think that needs to be either a decision made by the LSC or among PPLC.
So, sorry, Miss Amy. When I met with Dr. Fisher after reviewing proposals, I was incredibly impressed with her scope of work in working with teachers. I asked a lot of direct questions regarding her work in working with teachers and curriculum development, and she had experience in all of those areas that could guide the PPLC and teachers in our work in culturally relevant curriculum. So I would want to bring it to the PPLC. I would want to see what her proposal would be in terms of the work she would want want and be able to provide. But I wouldn't see why, unless there were barriers on her end, why she couldn't be a person to support the PPLC and teachers' work.
So Evan, that means she has 2 days
No,
to come to you with a proposal, no? Am I understanding this wrong?
So
First.
the work for next school year, which we would be voting on tonight, does not need to get worked out by the 21st. The work with the LSC needs to get, and she has a proposal, so that's not hard. Creating a purchase order is not hard. That's easy. We just need the vendor number and we can create the proposal, and then we need to identify what are the dates that work for her and work for us as a council to begin this work, so that by June 30th, we could have done at least $8,300, so to speak, of work. But then if the foundation is picking up the rest, then we have into the summer and into next school year for the rest of that.
Apologize for sounding so alarmist.
I understand. Thank you.
Just want to make sure.
Thank you for getting us to this clarifying position, Matthew.
Yeah. And Evan, thank you for bringing that up too. Sounds like we have at least an opening there. So.
Thank you, guys. And Matthew, now I know you do not read my emails. I understand.
He told me
now I know.
He filters them out.
But just, you know, for everyone else that's listening, so at this juncture, we've been waiting for CPS to set up Dr. Fisher and develop capacity as a vendor. But I'm glad to hear that Ms. Amy has gotten a communication that sounds like that has happened. So I'm just waiting to hear back from Dr. Fisher to confirm that her vendor number has been set up. And as Ms. Amy shared, she just needs to generate a purchase order. And of course, I'll work with the LSC on identifying what dates and whatnot. But I think we do need to circle back with Dr. Fisher just once we know what's going on with the foundation tomorrow afternoon. So that way everybody's on the same page going in. But Dr. Fisher is aware, you know, of what the LSC approved, that $8,300, and that we were looking towards a foundation for the additional funds. But we will definitely circle back with her when we know more after tomorrow afternoon. Back to you, Ms. Amy.
So that I am at the end of my CIWP and budget conversation. So I think the next part is to move into public participation before we take a vote.
Yes. So if there are any questions from folks out in the audience, please type stack in the chat. If you're watching on the YouTube, send an email to peircelsc@gmail.com. Nicole, I don't know if you happen to have it open.
I do. There aren't any emails yet.
Okay. Going once, twice. Stack, Gina. Gina?
Hi, sorry about that. I was gonna type, but then, so what are the options if that grant doesn't come through? Because we're already facing a deficit in the budget, but as a school as a whole, what are those options? Do we go to CPS? Do we go to, do I even want to say Friends of Peirce? Do we go to anybody else? And will Dr. Fisher say, well, you know what, I can tear up this contract now because you guys just don't have the money? Like, what do we do?
So I want to visit that question once we have a definitive answer tomorrow.
Thank you.
And as I learned from Ms. Amy, we do not sign contracts. Is that correct? Yes. So hopefully that addresses the concern, Gina, with Dr. Fisher, that CPS doesn't allow a contract to be signed. So
that is correct. You're right.
Any other questions? Okay. So we're going to move into we've had some discussion. If there's any more discussion and vote, is there a motion to approve the budget for school year 2021 to 22?
I will make the motion to approve the school's budget as outlined in this presentation for school year 22, along with the amendments proposed to the CIWP.
Is there a second?
Second it.
Bill,
That's
any
Bill.
discussion? So for roll call, I'm going to ask for this vote. For the folks that are in favor, if we could go LSC member by name. So Aisha, I vote to approve.
Is that Bill next?
All right, we got to alphabetize. Okay, yes.
Trying to do it in
I'm
my
next. I approve.
I think I'm next. I approve.
We skipped Elisa. Elisa's first.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
I approve.
I would be after Evan, I believe. I approve.
There's Jerry.
I think I'm after Jerry. I approve.
Holly.
I think I'm next, and I approve.
I approve.
I am last. I approved.
Oh, and I'm last, Nicole. I approve.
Oh. Oh.
Sweet burn, Nicole.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Budget passes. Thank you, Miss Amy. I know that you worked so hard to find every dollar, and a shout out to folks in the office. I know Miss Carroll really worked hard on getting those free and reduced lunch forms in.
Thank you, Principal Amy.
Yes, she made sure that we got our lunch forms in because she knows that that is dollars for the school, or now lack of. But
Thanks,
it's
Miss
still
Amy.
important.
I know how hard it is to do that presentation and to make it digestible for everybody. And so, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I
hard.
came in and I wanted to see like a lot of spreadsheets. I wanted to see like line. And she's like, no, sit down. I'm gonna give you this. This is what you need to digest. So thanks for doing that. It's it's my first time doing this, and there was a lot to learn. And how things move around and whatnot. So thank you for putting that together. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for your support.
Okay, moving on to announcements.
I just wanted to make a quick statement. I didn't know kind of when is the best time for this, but since we're kind of talking about Title I funds, I just wanted to acknowledge that although it seems like a good thing, of course, that we have less Peirce families that are in poverty, we know that families this year, especially during the COVID crisis, are not getting out of poverty. So, more likely it's that Peirce families are being displaced from our neighborhood due to gentrification. And so I just wanted to bring this up to the council and others in the Peirce community to consider how we might want to work together to do things like fight for affordable housing in our area and whatever else it might take to make sure that more of our neighbors and friends aren't pushed out of our neighborhood. So just wanted to bring that up and see, if anybody is already doing that type of work or is interested in this type of work. I'd love to hear from you and work together. And you can find my email address on the Peirce website.
Thanks, Nicole. Matthew, are you going to chime in?
Nope, I'm sorry.
Oh. Oh, thank you for bringing that up, because it makes me sad that those families have had to move out of the community, and I'd like to understand what we can do to slow that kind of exodus that seems to be happening. It's worrying. So thank you for speaking up on that issue. Any other announcements? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thanks, everyone. Thank you again, Ms. Samey. Thanks to Veronica. Thanks to Ms. Munoz, and everyone for being here and for your thoughtful comments. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.